Stanley Kubrick is kind of widely regarded to be one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I feel like the recognition is pretty earned. He's made movies that are widely recognized to be some of the greatest films ever made. I'm a huge fan of his. I like a lot of his movies quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tier list them. So let's just jump right into it. Before a little preface, this is just his feature length films, the core filmography. I'm not going to be talking about his documentary shorts because I haven't seen those and I can't really express any opinions on things that I haven't watched. And also, there's not going to be a ranking inside the tiers. I know sometimes when people make tier lists, they like to rank them within the tiers. That's just overly complicating it. No need to do that. So I'm going to go in order of release, starting with Fear and Desire, which is an anti-war movie, his debut feature that came out in the 50s. Not a lot of people have seen it in comparison to his bigger films, probably because it's not very good or memorable. It's not awful by any means. It's about 60 minutes long, so it's not very long, but there's just nothing really special about it. You can tell he's probably still kind of finding his voice, trying to figure out who he wants to be as a filmmaker. It's nothing awful or anything. It's not unwatchable by any means. So I think it fits kind of neatly in the D tier. E and F, they're not going to be used. Even his worst, Fear and Desire, is still perfectly watchable. It's just not going to blow you away by any means. Following that was Killer's Kiss. I think it kind of honestly is in the same boat as Fear and Desire. Very different subject. It's a noir, but it's kind of the same length, same amount of memorability. Not going to blow you away by any means. If you're a fan of noir, classic 50s crime stuff, you might find a little something out of it. That's most certainly not my thing. I don't really like noir of any kind. I can appreciate maybe a more neo-noir type crime, but for me, these 50s black and white crime movies, they're just fine. I think it's D tier. Fear and Desire and Killer's Kiss are both very much on the same plane for me. There's not anything that's wildly interesting about either. And following that is another crime noir, The Killing. Perhaps a little bit more watchable, I think, than Fear and Desire and Killer's Kiss. Not, like I said, not the other two are bad by any means. This one is probably just a little bit more engaging. Particularly, there's a scene where there's a bar fight, and it's really funny. It's so ridiculous, honestly. It almost strikes me as being intentionally funny. I'm gonna put it in C tier. It's better than Fear and Desire and Killer's Kiss, but it's not that amazing or anything like that. Following that would be Paths of Glory. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Paths of Glory is awesome. I'm not a big war movie person. I typically find them to not be super interesting. There are of course exceptions. Paths of Glory is one of them because I honestly think it's A tier. This is one of the best war movies ever made. And it's kind of neat because it's a war movie, but it's more about the psychology of war and the repercussions on both an individual and a government and a country's level and what it means to be in a war and fighting in a war. There's not a lot of action in this. There's really none at all. It's mostly about Kirk Douglas's character and his men and what they go through and taking orders and stuff. It's really quite fascinating. One of the better war movies, anti-war movies ever, in my opinion. It's quite excellent. Following that is something that is going to put me asleep just by talking about it, which is Spartacus. So Spartacus, if you haven't heard of it, is a 3-hour historical epic, and it is really good melatonin. If you're looking for a movie to put you asleep, throw on Spartacus. It'll knock you right out. It's 3 hours long, narratively boring. There's nothing interesting in the story, in my opinion. The production design, the scope of the whole thing is very cool, very interesting. There are some aspects of it that are neat to look at, but I don't find it to be particularly engaging in any way, shape, or form. I will say that there are other movies on this list that are perhaps a little narratively thin, but the production design and stuff is so engaging that it keeps you in it. Spartacus is not one of them. Spartacus is just boring. I don't know. I can appreciate it on like a historical level, like what it, this era of Hollywood is very interesting. It was written by Dalton Trumbo, who's one of the greatest screenwriters ever. Probably not his strongest script because, like I said, the story is boring. If you like it, though, I get it. There is definitely an appeal to it. It's just not really for me. It's C tier. Yeah, it's like a hard C tier for me. Following that is Doctor Strangelove, which now I think moving forward, things are starting to get like really good. Everything is like really like good, very good at like the least. And Doctor Strangelove is probably great. I would put above that, which means it's probably A tier. I love this movie. It's hilarious. It has amazing performance from Peter Sellers, who played 3 characters in it. It's very well known. He's really just awesome. He's really great. We love him. I kind of grew up watching him in the Pink Panther movies, playing Inspector Clouseau. He's a very funny dude. This isn't his only appearance also in Stanley Kubrick's filmography either. This movie's fantastic. If you haven't seen it, it's a legendary movie. One of the greatest satires of all time. Must watch. A tier. Nicely in there. Following that is it's Lolita. Lolita is another collaboration with Peter Sellers. He is in it for a bit, and he is quite good in it. Shocking, I know. I have my fair share of issues with this movie. It's good. I enjoyed it. I will say it is too long. It's about 2.5 hours long. It overstays its welcome quite a bit. Obviously, the subject matter, the source material. It's a movie about a pedophile. So, it's going to be a little touchy. There are some I've heard there are portions of the novel which were unable to be adapted, which is interesting considering the fact that it was shocking that it was adapted at all. But regardless, I'm going to put it in B tier because I do think it's like pretty good. It's funnier than I was expecting. Particularly Lolita is quite funny as a character. But I don't know. There are points in it where I feel like they want me to feel bad for Humbert, and he's obviously a pedophile. So like, I'm not giving you no empathy for you, pal, because he's oddly mistreated. Like he should be mistreated. Like he shouldn't have any respect because he's a pedophile. But it's really weird because I feel like they want me, the audience in general, to like feel bad for him, and I kind of take issue with that because he's a pedophile. Regardless, it's a pretty good movie though. Honestly, it's pretty entertaining, even if it's just a bit too long. So next is the big one, 2001: A Space Odyssey. So 2001 is obviously renowned, widely accepted as one of the greatest films ever made, inspired an entire generation of filmmakers. Guys like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg are 2 that come to mind, that have kind of outwardly said 2001 did everything for me as a filmmaker, as an aspiring creative. But I think its reputation has become so, I don't want to say like oversaturated, but like you have to like 2001 or you are wrong. And here is my take. It's overrated. It is overrated. It's excellent. It's a great movie. I respect it. It is visually one of the like most incredible movies I've ever seen in my life. There's obviously, so much that's iconic about it, but narratively, it's just, there's not a lot going on. And, like with Spartacus, narratively, it was so boring that it kind of kept you out of it. The advantage that 2001 has is that it's, while narratively kind of boring, it can usually keep you in it because it's so like visually like stunning, and it's so, aggressively like in your face with like, look at how cool this looks. And that's great, but in my opinion, it only gets you so far. And there's just these stretches where there's just breathing. And fun fact, Stanley Kubrick did some of that breathing, apparently, which is kind of weird. But I don't know. And there's a lot that I love about it, because I really do respect it, and I really do think it's a great movie. And just I'm going to put it in A tier. Like, it's not like I'm not trying to trash it. But I'm trying to more justify my placement for it, because I don't know. It's just, I love the scenes at the beginning, particularly with the apes, the humanoids, or whatever they're specifically called, and where they discover the monolith, and I think that's super cool. I don't know. I got bored when they were in space. I did. I got bored. And I guess I'll just leave it at that, honestly, and move on. Next is A Clockwork Orange. One of the most vile and heartless movies I've ever seen. But luckily I'm a degenerate, and I was excited to watch it, and because I knew this reputation that it had, and it lived up to the yuckiness for a bit. I like A Clockwork Orange, but I do not love it. I think once, spoiler alert, Alex is taken into custody, it loses some traction. I'm personally not as interested in that parts of the movie, but it has very interesting, very unique production design. Obviously, the dialogue is very unique because it's based on that like Russian kind of slang. I forget what it's called, but it was written like that in the novel. So it was adapted very accurately, which is very cool, because a lot of times adaptations are not very respectful of the source material, but I understand that Clockwork Orange is very like close to it. But I don't know. I think because I lost interest a bit, kind of heading into the middle part, I can't really like express my deep admiration and love for it. So I'm going to put it in B tier. I think that's a good place for it, because I do like it. It's not a movie that's for everyone. That's for sure. So following A Clockwork Orange is Barry Lyndon. And I'm just going to flat out say it. It's my favorite. It is my absolute favorite Stanley Kubrick movie. It is super great. And before I get called a hypocrite for criticizing, perhaps trashing on a 3-hour historical movie by Stanley Kubrick in Spartacus, and then praising a 3-hour historical period drama in Barry Lyndon, I will say that these two are so vastly on different planes of how to make a 3-hour movie that I could make an entire video about it. Spartacus is 3 hours of narrative boring nothing, and Barry Lyndon is 3 hours of engaging characters, hilarious situations, whether intentional or not. Barry Lyndon, Redmond Barry, is one of the most interesting characters that Stanley Kubrick has had. He's this ridiculous character who makes these ridiculous decisions, and he's just a fool, and has the greatest cinematography ever. And I'm almost willing to say that. And obviously not that I've seen like every movie ever, because who has, but from what I've seen, I finished Barry Lyndon and I am in awe. Every frame looks like a painting, and that's intentional, obviously, but it's a masterful job. It's just so incredible. And I don't know, I know there are portions of Kubrick fans that choose Barry Lyndon as their favorite, but I feel like it's almost underappreciated, especially in this era where it was like banger after banger after banger from Kubrick. Barry Lyndon is S tier, and it's just that. There's not so much that I can say, because it's just me gushing about it and how much I love it. I think it's a really like a masterpiece, honestly. I do. And I don't want to use that word lightly either. It is a masterpiece. So following that is The Shining, which is widely considered to be one of the greatest horror movies of all time, and I think there's a good reason for it, honestly. It's so fantastic on so many levels. It's so iconic in the genre, and I love it. I think it's amazing. I think it's one of the greatest horror movies ever, definitely. It's S tier. While I don't think it's horrifying, I don't think it's particularly like super scary. I think a lot of the themes it touches on, and there's these iconic scenes that are just so excellent, whether they're, terrifying or they're just creepy or unsettling. It truly is amazing. Jack Nicholson is amazing. Kubrick, of course, has received quite a bit of criticism for his treatment of Shelley Duvall in this movie, and I'm not really here to talk about that, but obviously that's important to note that, it's been kind of widely understood that she was mistreated throughout the production of The Shining, but nonetheless, I think she's great in it. I know there are people that thought she was awful. Well, I don't know. I don't get that. But yeah, The Shining is just it's The Shining. What can I say about it? Following that is Full Metal Jacket. I really like Full Metal Jacket, but like I mentioned earlier, I'm not like this huge war movie person. And I don't know. I love the first half when they're at boot camp, and Gunnery Sergeant Hartman is just like bullying the hell out of Joker and Pyle. It is some of the most engaging filmmaking that Stanley Kubrick ever made. But that second half, I'm part of that group of people, I think, that don't love it as much. And there's more, I think, tangible, thematic things in that second half, and Kubrick's obviously trying to say a lot about war and stuff. That's great, and I think it's fantastic, and I still think it's a very good movie all around. 100% of it is great, but that first half is just so incredibly engaging and so iconic that you can't help but look at the second half and not, be underwhelmed a bit. I don't know. That's just my opinion, though. I'm gonna put it in B tier. If I can be honest with you, if that second half was as engaging and memorable and iconic as the first, it probably would be an S tier, and it would probably be my favorite war movie ever. But because of that, I don't know. It's just, love that first half, though. I really do. And for the final movie of Stanley Kubrick's life, obviously he passed away a couple days after he showed it to the studio. It's Eyes Wide Shut. Eyes Wide Shut is phenomenal. It's so interesting to see, especially when watching Eyes Wide Shut. If you watch through all of Kubrick's filmography, through like in order, and watching that evolution, Eyes Wide Shut is so fascinating because he's working with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, who are kind of stars of that era. And when you look back, and this dude made war movies in like the 50s and like, Hollywood like studio epics with Spartacus, and he really I don't know, Eyes Wide Shut is so fascinating. And if Kubrick had not passed away, I'd be curious to see if he would have continued to make movies throughout the 2000s, because obviously Eyes Wide Shut came out in 1999. I do love it, though. I think it's really it's just a lot, honestly. It's a very dense movie. It's worth multiple watches. And the things that it says about relationships and the power dynamics in relationships and how sex plays a part in that. And it's just so fascinating. And watching Tom Cruise kind of wander around and kind of just meet all these wild characters. And it's just, I don't know, it's so fascinating. And the last word in the movie is the F word.
And that's pretty funny.
It's A tier. It's like a hard A tier. It's so fantastic. It's so wonderful. Wildly amazing. It's great. It's just great. It's Eyes Wide Shut, and I love it. Not as much as The Shining and Barry Lyndon, though, obviously. So that's kind of all I really have to say about Stanley Kubrick. He really is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. There's no real debate there. I'm a huge fan of his. I love most of his movies. There are a couple, obviously, that I think are just kind of meh. But, yeah, so that's my opinion on Stanley Kubrick. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and on Letterboxd. And I'll see you guys next time.